A dramatic 12 hours for Alpine as team principal Ollie Oakes resigns before it is announced that Franco Colapinto will replace Jack Doohan for at least the next 5 races. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks for this special F1 update, I suppose, Ian. And I mean Alpine chaos, a remarkable 12 hours. Let's get started, of course, with the driver swap. I mean, we've had 6 races, and there's already now our second driver swap of the season. It's truly remarkable what's happening this year. Franco Colapinto is in from Imola for Jack Doohan, but for the time being, only for 5 races.
Weird. That's all I can say. That's the best word I can find to describe this. And I say weird because, as we were just discussing before we came on air, that 5 races, it means that a decision will be made between the Austrian and British Grand Prix, which are back-to-back. Why not give Franco 6 races? Because after the British Grand Prix, there is then a longer extended gap of 2.5 weeks before we then go into the concluding part of this first half of the season with the Hungarian and Belgian Grand Prix. So really weird to say you've got 5 races and then immediately after we have the British. So then at least you've got 6 races Jack, 6 races Franco, and then you've got a really good comparison. Then you've got a longer period to sit down and evaluate all the data, all the information that you've got. Flavio, as we now know, is in charge, can sit down with all the analysts and technical people around him, and he can work out 6 races here, 6 races for this guy. Who shall we go with from now on? So really, really weird. That's all I'm going to say, Nick.
And of course, you know, in Jack's case, the end of his 6 race stint didn't end very well, of course, with what happened in Miami in that first lap retirement following the collision with Liam Lawson. But actually, based on the comments he came out with during, following his crash, he didn't sound like a driver who thought he wouldn't be in the car in Imola.
No, exactly. I mean, I spoke to Jack directly. He came to the driver's pen, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those people that was stood in front of him at the time. So we can only assume that this call was made later that evening. And that's the suggestion that's actually emerged, that Flavio Briatore took this decision seemingly without Ollie Oakes' approval. And that's why we've now got Ollie Oakes' sudden resignation without any explanation. So, but certainly Jack in the media pen on Sunday after that crash, and that was a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other kind of incident with Liam Lawson. Neither driver blamed the other in the pen either. So just one of those kind of things that happened. But Jack, no, certainly he was quite open, quite honest, his usual kind of self in terms of his delivery when he's been asked questions and his responses. So there was nothing in his head at that stage. And there was no call you could quite clearly tell had been made at that stage for Jack to suddenly think, I'm out of my race seat here for the next race in Imola. Ollie Oakes had actually been asked in the Friday team principal's press conference when he was sat in between Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, and he referred to himself as Mr. Switzerland at that point because we know what those two warring factions are like either side of him. He was actually asked about Jack's position again, and he made quite clear Jack's going to be in the car for Imola, if I remember rightly. He'd already previously stated earlier this season that as far as he was concerned, Jack was in the car through to the summer. So I think through all of this, we can quite clearly determine that there's been Flavio on one side, Ollie Oakes on another, and we know that Flavio was instrumental in the signing of Franco Colapinto on this bizarre loan deal from Williams. And you would assume that a hefty chunk of money as well has been paid for that loan deal, although we now can assume that with all the sponsors that Franco comes with, that's how it is being paid for. But nevertheless, if there has been this split between Franco and Ollie, I think it has now quite clearly come to a head with whatever call Flavio has decided to make post-Miami Grand Prix, and Ollie just thinking, do you know what, folks? I'm out of here. I can't go on with this too much longer. I've put up with it for as long as I can. Bearing in mind that Ollie as well came in as team principal late July of last year, just before the summer break. He had the summer break to catch up with things, and then all of a sudden, Flavio Briatore walks in just a few weeks later. I seem to remember it was the Italian Grand Prix was his first appearance. So whilst there was this dynamic between Ollie and Flavio at the time, this young gun, up and coming, and this, of course, this older hired hand, huge amount of experience, of course, within Formula One. And no matter what you may think of Flavio and everything that, of course, that surrounded him regarding his exit after all that took place with around the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix and the Crashgate saga, nevertheless, as I say, you had this younger guy, up and coming, working his way through, hugely experienced nonetheless with junior formulae, and then, but you had this older hand as well. But so how much, though, was Ollie feeling like his strings were being pulled, that he was effectively the puppet and Flavio was the puppet master? Because Flavio has never at any stage, barring an initial press conference that with his introduction in Monza, has actually spoken publicly. We've done one or two interviews, as we know, behind the scenes, but actually it's always been Ollie that's had to be the front-facing figure of Alpine. It's always been Ollie that's had to answer the questions around Jack, always been Ollie that's had to answer the questions around Franco, and now, and of course around Renault as well, with the Renault departure.
Of course.
Which was hugely high profile at the time. It was Ollie that had to answer those questions, and he had literally been jettisoned in to this situation whereby they were waving goodbye to Renault at the end of this season. So very difficult situation that Ollie Oakes has had to manage over this very short period of time that he's been in charge, around 9 months. And now, quite clearly, it would appear from the outside looking in that we've got this dynamic, and it's been the older guy, the Luca Di Maio hiring, and it was Luca Di Maio that we know brought in Flavio Briatore. Luca Di Maio, of course, being the Renault CEO that brought in Flavio Briatore. So if there was always going to be one winner out of this situation, it was always going to be Flavio. Flavio's hiring of Franco Colapinto. Flavio that said, I want that guy. He's got his wish. He's now got Franco in the car for 5 Grand Prix. But as we just discussed, that's a really weird one. Should really be 6, Flavio. So that one's not quite been thought through in my book. But here we go. This is the situation. Chaos at Alpine. Let's see what happens going forward now for these 5 races.
And just to give a quick timeline, it was 8 p.m. UK time Tuesday evening when Oliver Oakes' resignation was announced, before 8 a.m. UK time on Wednesday morning that it was announced that Franco and Jack would swap places. Franco Colapinto, Ian, must be a big fan of Italy because, of course, it was last season's Italian Grand Prix where he came in for Logan Sargent of Williams. Of course, it's now going to be next weekend's Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix where he's going to come in for Jack. Obviously, another race in Italy. It must be a country he likes. But for Franco, obviously, has got at least 5 races, as we've just discussed. And last season, when he came in for Logan at Williams, initially showed remarkable pace. It saw him linked with pretty much so many teams up and down the pit lane, Red Bull being one of them, because Franco was almost made out to be this remarkable shining star. Where has he come from? Of course, though, we then saw a very quick downfall and several very big crashes costing Williams significant money, and of course in the end he didn't get a seat full time on the 2025 grid. This is a big chance for Franco because actually not many drivers get a second chance after having the number of crashes he had.
He's got, for me, Nick, I think he's got a lot to prove.
Yeah,
based on what we saw over the course of towards the back end of last season. But don't forget as well, he also had a crash in practice in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. So that was the first of his crashes. Everybody remembers the big ones at the end because obviously they took place in the Grand Prix, etc. But for me, he'd already blotted his copybook slightly. He redeemed himself with a couple of really good drives, scoring points. And then all of a sudden, as you say, it really tailed off for him big time. So for me, Franco Colapinto has an awful lot to prove still. And that you can imagine that's why Alpine has decided it's going to give him this 5-race evaluation to prove that he genuinely has got what it takes. 5 races, as I say, should really be 6, but I've discussed that one at length already. Just really weird. I'm going to say it again,
It's
just
odd.
weird. It is odd. It is very odd. But nevertheless, 5 races now to prove himself. And we've got to bear in mind as well, Jack's not been jettisoned
No.
at all. He's been retained in the Franco Colapinto role that the Argentinian had for these first 6 races, i.e. the primary test and reserve driver. So Jack has now had to make way, and he has got to be the one sat and stood on the sidelines looking on at what Franco Colapinto is going to be doing and how he is going to be forming. And you can imagine that, knowing Jack reasonably well, he's going to be looking at all the data that Franco's coming out with and just thinking, yeah, working out, could I have done any better? Or thinking, actually, I could have done that better. Who knows? But nevertheless, tough situation for Jack, because he's been in that car for 6 races, and now to all of a sudden just be, as I say, sat and stood on the sidelines, looking on from the pit wall, from the garage, wherever he might be over these next 5 Grand Prix. That's going to be really, really difficult. Different for Franco, because he knew what the situation was when he came in. He knew Jack was the driver of that second car for this season, the teammate of Pierre Gasly. So it was a question of just being patient, just waiting for his opportunity. It's come pretty much as we expected, because if you recall, Nick, we had all this speculation over the winter. Jack's only got a 5-race deal. Jack's only got a 6-race deal. He'll be out either after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix or he'll be out after the Miami Grand Prix. Well, guess what? Lo and behold, here he is, out after the Miami Grand Prix, despite the comments from Ollie Oakes and the belief was that Jack had got that seat through to the summer. Well, now it's Jack that is unfortunately on the sidelines. So really, really tough situation for Jack. And now all he can do is, as Flavio Briatore mentioned in the press release comments that we've had on the Wednesday morning, as you mentioned, that 8 a.m. release, is to continue to be as professional as he possibly can be, as he has so far proven to be across these first 6 races, and all the speculation and the pressure that's been brought to bear on him as well over this period of time. Really tough for Jack, but for me, he's now just got to bide his time and see what Franco has got to show for himself, because for me, Franco has one hell of a lot to prove after what happened at the end of last season with Williams.
And of course, if Franco is to have big crashes, it's the worst time possible for Alpine with a cost cap. And of course, the big development around next season, of course, the new race for 2026. But it was interesting that the press release did include quotes from Jack, and he pointed out himself that he's going to be watching the next 5 races with interest. But there was one line in particular in the Flavio Briatore quotes, just to finish us off, which I thought was fascinating. And it seems like, this driver swap, even though it's only for 5 races, actually, there's a lot behind this in regard to Flavio and the team looking ahead to not the rest of this season, but actually 2026.
Well, that's the bigger picture, isn't it? Because we all know for every team, every driver, there's so much riding on 2026 because we've got this major regulation change coming. Now, for Alpine in particular, huge changes, even more so than for many of the other teams, because they are changing power unit provider, having been so long this Renault-backed, Renault-supported organisation. We know there's the factory at Enston, of course, where the Formula One team is housed, but we know it's always had this power unit engine operation at Viry-Châtillon. And now that's it. The Renault support has gone. It's going to be a Mercedes power unit in the back of that car. So there's an awful lot riding, not only on these next 5 races, but these next 18 races in total for Alpine, to really evaluate everything with regarding not just its driver lineup, but its development of the car, its integration of the Mercedes power unit into that car. Because 2026 for them is probably for them, not more than many other teams, I would suggest, given everything that's going on around it at the minute, a huge season for the team, because as I say, it's losing this Renault support that it's had for decades now, and it's going with this Mercedes power unit, and now it's really got to get on top of who are our drivers going to be, because you would assume that it wants consistency, it wants stability. So that's why it's doing this evaluation between Franco. But what then after these 5 races? What if Franco makes a complete mess of it? What if he crashes in Monaco, he crashes in Austria or somewhere? Where does the team then go? Does it then bring Jack back in? It's just, I'm going to use the word again, and this is probably going to be our thumbnail on this video, folks, when you see it on YouTube. Weird. It's I've never known anything like it in Formula One, quite like the situation whereby you start off with one driver, you then bring in another just for 5 Grand Prix as an evaluation, and then you work out, right, folks, what are we going to do? It's
crazy, weird, bizarre, chaos. And of course, to those watching this video, be sure to let us know your thoughts on the driver swap and Ollie Oaks' resignation in the comment section below. If you can please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel as well, that would be very much appreciated. Ian, amazing stuff as always. Enjoy the rest of your week off. This has been a special F1 update from myself and Ian. We'll see you later. Bye guys.
Take care as always, folks.